take off, take flight with you. For we never fly, but we're flying.
Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Take Flight Podcast. This is episode number 244, and it's part of our Take Flight Takeaway episode, where one of the hosts of Take Flight Podcast walks you through a topic that they feel like the listeners can gain true value from. This week's episode will be hosted by myself, OLU OKUNOLA. In this week's episode, I want to do a follow-up of episode number 222, which was called Why I Am Selling My Apartment. In this week's episode, I want to walk through the hidden costs when selling an apartment, go through the time frame, and some of my lessons learned from my current process of selling my apartment. Now, before we get started, a quick disclaimer. I've got my iPad. I'll quickly read it. This podcast is for information purposes only. Matters discussed are not intended to provide and should not be relied on as investment, accounting, legal, tax advice, or recommendations. The views and opinions presented are those of the four presenters, and these may change. We advise that you seek and obtain independent financial advice in relations to your personal circumstances. So let's get started. Now, if you're in the process of selling your apartment, then this video is exactly what you need. Now, I'm going to go through the process of selling my apartment, lessons learned, the hidden cost that you should take into consideration. So whilst or when you're going through that process of selling your apartment, you can make the right decisions. So the first thing to take into consideration is the time frame when selling an apartment. Now, I had to go back and look at when I started the process with my solicitors with the sale of my apartment. Now, I accepted an offer beginning of the year in January. After accepting that offer, I instructed a solicitor on the 31st of January. So I'll say 1st of Feb is when I started my legal process. So that's sending in all the documentations to your solicitor in terms of proof of identity. They send you a survey where you have to fill in information about your apartment in terms of what furniture you're going to leave, what the apartment's going to come with. For example, is it going to come with an oven, a stove, etc., boiler, all these different informations. That started on the 1st of February. And I finally got a completion date, which is going to be the end of July. So it's taken me 6 months to be able to complete the legal process. I think that's the first thing you should take into consideration. Apartments take a longer time to complete than selling a house. Now, selling a house where it's freehold, you're normally advised that it probably would take between 12 weeks. So I would say roughly around 3 months to sell a freehold home or house, right? Now, when it comes to an apartment, a leasehold, right, there's just so much documentation that your solicitor have to go through. Now, luckily for me, mine took 6 months, which, if I'm honest, was a lengthy process. But you hear about some people taking 9 to 12 months to sell the apartment just because of all the legal documentation, the dotting your I's and crossing your T's that these legal teams have to go through. So that's the first thing to take into consideration. The second thing when you're selling your apartment is finding the right method to sell. One of the largest costs you're probably going to have when selling your apartment is the solicitor fees in which you're going to have to pay on completion of the sale of your apartment. So typically when you find an estate agent to advertise your apartment, they will sign you on a contract where they would get a range of, I'll say 0.9 to 3% commission of the value of your property. So it's very important in the initial stages that you negotiate a really good rate. The lower that rate, that percentage in which they give you or that they take, the more of the amount that you sold your property you get to keep, and the lower the fees that you're paying to the estate agent. Now, the best method, I would say, would be going direct to a buyer, right? You want to cut out the middleman, cut out the estate agent. but most people don't have the know-how or the experience to advertise their own apartment. They don't have a photographer that they can find to take pictures. So in most cases, people have to go through the estate agent. But what I advise you to do and spend a lot of your time at the beginning is negotiating down whatever the percentage that they want for selling commission. So what I advise you to do is work on reducing the commission percentage that your estate agent wants. Now, I was able to agree at 1.7% on my property. And for me, that's the largest cost when selling my apartment. But that's the second advice. The third thing you should take into consideration is instructing your own solicitor. Now, the estate agent is going to recommend you a solicitor. They're going to say, go with this solicitor. It's going to speed up the process. I'm going to tell you right now, 9 out of 10 times it doesn't. Find your own solicitor that's got a really good rating, recommended, someone's used before, and is very knowledgeable about leasehold and selling apartments. Now, I made a rookie mistake. I went with a solicitor that my estate agent recommended. Later on, I went on Google to check the reviews and they got a 3-star rating. And I know why after dealing with them for the last 6 months. So I recommend finding your own solicitor, either recommended by a friend or someone that's used them, and then checking the Google reviews just to make sure that they've got a really good rating. Now, what you're going to really look for is someone that communicates really well. So they communicate the processes. They're very proactive. Also, someone that's a solution-oriented person. Sometimes you deal with solicitors that will always tell you problems, but they don't come with solutions. So I'm spending time on YouTube looking at legal terms and conditions. I personally feel like I gained a legal degree during this process and going back and forth with my solicitor, say, have you considered X? Have you considered Y? And sometimes it was a joke because she's like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Maybe I should have considered that. And I'm like, wait, what am I paying you for? So it's okay even to pay a little bit more for a good solicitor. It will save you so much time. So thirdly, find your own solicitor and one that is highly recommended and got a really good rating. The fourth thing is really around responding to your solicitor ASAP. So if it's paperwork, documentations that they need, the quicker you reply and you respond to them, the quicker the process will move. So typically, if my solicitor sends me something at night time, I will spend time collecting the documentations that she needs, filling out the form, and then I send it the next day. And then I'll follow up with a phone call just to say, hey, I've sent it to you. Any questions, let me know ASAP so I can resolve it. Another thing is really being proactive when your solicitor sends stuff to your management agency. Management agencies typically have certain processes where when they receive an email, they won't respond back to you in the next sort of 2-3 days. I didn't listen to that process. Anytime my solicitor sent an email to the management agent, I'll call them up and say, hey, my solicitor sent you this email. Are you able to respond by end of day today or tomorrow? Let's move forward and go into some of the hidden fees, because I know that's what a lot of people have been waiting for. So let's break down some of the costs associated to selling an apartment or a leasehold apartment. First thing is your solicitor fees. Now, my solicitors initially provided me with an invoice around 1,300, which is higher than when you're selling a house. And that's due to two really key elements. One is leasehold, because it's a leasehold property, they charge roughly around £200 associated to just dealing with a leasehold property. From my understanding, there's more documentation, there's more work associated to it. Also, if you've got a property that's been affected by Building Safety Act, even though my property didn't have cladding or anything and I had a fire safety certificate to prove it, there was an additional £500 fee that I needed to pay my solicitor associated to that. So that's already £700 more that I had to pay just because I'm selling an apartment versus selling a house, a freehold property. The next thing is management packs. Now, I had to pay close to £1,000 for management packs from my management agency. Now, again, I'm asking the question, What am I paying my solicitor if my management agency has to put a pack with all this information associated to my property, my leasehold, my service charge, etc.? And why does it cost £1,000? And then on top of that, so on top of the solicitor fee, the management packs, then you've also got the commission that you pay to the estate agent, which was the 1.7%. So adding all of that together, all in all, I was paying roughly around 2.5% of the value of my property just to fees. So just an assumption, if your property, you sold it for 300,000, the apartment, I'm paying roughly around 7,500 just on fees. I know, ridiculous in my mind, thinking how difficult it is to sell an apartment and how much people are making money off you selling your apartment. So that's a number or something to take and keep into consideration. On top of just those sort of fees associated to selling your property, you need to take into consideration your moving costs. So you need to get a mover to move all your furniture and things outside of your property. Now that will range between £55 an hour to £120 per hour, depending on how many movers you have. But if you think about it, let's say 2 days to move, you're looking at probably close to around 2K of cost, two plus K of cost to actually physically move your furniture and items from one property to the next where you're moving to. So that now jumps up from the 2.5% that I mentioned to close to 3%. So you're looking at, again, if you're selling your apartment for 300K, you're looking at around 9K worth of cost or fees associated to just selling, solicitor, estate agent, management agency, and also movers and people facilitating and helping you move apartment. You can see there's big business when it comes to supporting or facilitating someone when selling their apartment. Now, the last thing that I'm not going to really mention the cost, but I think you should also take into consideration is your interest rates. Now, because I didn't want to have to pay the bank an early repayment fee, I'm currently on a variable mortgage rate. So that means as soon as I sell my apartment, there's no early repayment fees that I have to pay the bank. Otherwise, again, more costs to take into consideration. But what I meant is the 6 months in which I was going through the legal procedures, I'm having to pay a higher interest rate. So that's also something to take into consideration. If you're outside of your fixed period, the time frame it takes to sell your apartment, you will also have to budget for having to pay that variable mortgage rate for that period of time. If you're not outside of your fixed period, that's also another cost you need to take into consideration. Speak to your broker, call up your bank, and figure out how much they're going to charge you for having to do an early repayment. So I hope this episode has been very informative. I've had my iPad in front of me because I've been looking at some of my notes and also looking at my invoice. But so just to wrap up, right? I hope you found this episode really enjoyable, but I just want to summarize some of my key advice and things that you should take into consideration. Firstly, find your own solicitor. Find one that's been recommended, one that's experienced, one that has a really good rating, because you don't want to have to deal with a headache of dealing with an incompetent solicitor firm, right? Find your own solicitor, instruct them. It's going to save you so much time. Secondly, be very proactive when it comes to communicating with your solicitor, sending back documentations, following up with your management agency. No one cares, and this is one of my biggest statements, no one cares about your financial situation, your personal situation more than yourself. So you can't expect your solicitor to be always proactive. You have to be the person that's proactive. Send back your documents as soon as possible. Follow up frequently. If you need to even harass them, doesn't matter. I'm sure my solicitor finds me absolutely annoying. That's okay. And then my last thing is just to plan between 3 to 5% of your sale price for fees. Now, when I say fees, they're the ones that I've mentioned. If it's your solicitor fee, management agent, estate agent, mover cost. So between 3 to 5%, you should take into consideration. So for an example, a property that you're selling for 300K, that would be between 9 to 15K of fees that you have to take into consideration. think it's really good to break that down, break those costs. I think a lot of people have purchased properties. Not that many people have purchased and also sold. So I think it's good really to give you that insight into how much you should always take into consideration. If you are an investor, right, you should also take that into consideration when buying a property. You should say, okay, what is my exit strategy? If I am planning to flip or sell this property in the future, I should take into consideration between 3 to 5% of the sell price is also going to go towards fees. So you need to make sure you have that margin of profit when taking into consideration your investment in buy-to-lets or any other property investments. So I hope this episode has been really helpful. I've really enjoyed going through it, researching and reflecting on this whole process. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on Take Flight Podcast or reach out directly to me on OLU. Take care and God bless.
Take off.